quick lightning talk on a topic that is quite dear to me, which is personal retrospectives, with the less catchy title, How Personal Retrospectives Help Me Enjoy Being Lazy. I am Jakob. I'm an Android engineer. I work for Moonpig. There I'm also a co-host of the Moonpig Tech podcast. So if you ever want to listen to me speak a bit more, you can find us on Spotify and iTunes and all of that. And I'm also quite active in the community. I'm an organizer for Socrates UK. I'm also a co-organizer for the LSCC Code Dojo, and of course you can find me on Twitter with my very Austrian surname. I'm sorry for that. So I hope all of you went to the keynote from Christina Lee in the morning, which is really good because that's basically the first part of my talk, so I can cut it all out. And just as a quick recap, basically the question is what motivates you? And in a very short answer, it's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And if you haven't seen Christina's talk, wait for the video to be uploaded. Please watch it. It's really, really good. She did an amazing job at explaining these things way better than I could ever do. So what I can basically jump in is the question of why do we do retrospectives? I hope most of you in your companies do retrospectives. So you set out a time frame normally if you do sprints 2 weeks or something like that. And at the end of the 2 weeks, you meet and you sit down with your colleagues and you think about what went good, what went bad, how can we improve, do we need to adjust our process in any way? And when we think about why this is important and why this is really, really good and why it works in a work environment, is because normally when we think about learning, so either learning when building a product or learning a skill like playing the guitar, we have a single feedback loop. So normally you say like, okay, I want to learn the guitar, so you figure out how to do a C major chord, so you make the decision to, I want to play a C major chord, you hit the strings, and you get feedback. And normally when you start, the feedback is, that didn't sound quite right. So you use that feedback to adjust your next execution, and basically that's how you learn and how you improve. But as Christina already mentioned earlier, is actually the way you make a decision is because you have mental models of how things are supposed to work. And these mental models feed into your decision-making rules, and that influences your decision of how you execute something, or how you try to execute something. So now comes why we do retrospectives, because what we actually want to do is we want to go into a double loop learning and a double feedback loop, which is we want to take the feedback of how something went and we want to improve our mental model. We want to improve in the terms of like when we build a product, how we go about building this product, how do we talk to our users to get feedback and build the right thing. Or for example, when you learn playing the guitar, everyone knows if you have a teacher and a teacher can give you feedback to improve your mental model, you are gonna learn way quicker than trying to learn the guitar on your own. And now comes the extra little trick, which is now, when you improve your mental model, you should also adjust what kind of feedback do you want. So that's what we do with data-driven decision-making. We're saying, oh, we want to improve this part of our app, so we need to collect information of how users behave in that part of our app, and therefore we can get more feedback and we can improve our mental model of how we're gonna make our next decisions and how we're gonna improve. And it's exactly the same for when you're trying to learn something. You want to get feedback and you want to change how you collect feedback depending on which stage you're on and what you're trying to focus on. So in order to try to do something, try to learn something, you need to identify a goal. For example, I want to learn the guitar. Or as a company, we want to build a product. And even more specifically, as a person, you want to figure out what do I want to do with my life, which is not easy. At least I think it's not easy. So also mentioned earlier already, great books by Carl Newport. One of the ways that he describes you should set your longer term goals is you should pick a handful of goals, professional and personal, and you should define key activities of how you think these goals are basically achieved when you execute these key activities. And what this means is basically If you want to, for example, be one of the best Android programmers, you can define 3 key activities. I want to know the ins and outs of the Android SDK. I want to contribute to open source libraries and tools. And for example, I want to give talks and write blog posts to share my knowledge and give back to the community. So what is really interesting about these goals is that they're not binary. There's not like, I did this, done, and now it's over, right? You can learn everything you could know about the current Android SDK, but there will be a new one, so you need to stay up to date. You can give 1 or 2 or 3 talks, but you can also stop doing that again, and therefore you're not doing these key activities. So a good example of a bad key activity would be if you're a hobby writer and you say, I want people to buy 1,000 copies of my book. Done. What now? Okay, right? So this is where binary goals are not ideal for longer term kind of like ambitions of yours. And as I said on the previous slide, write those down. I found it really, really difficult. I was kind of reading this and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of know what I want to do. And I was thinking about it. And basically 2 days later I was like, well, if I kind of know what I want to do, I can write this down. And what I figured out is actually, it's really tricky. And it basically took me 3 kind of like iterations on like refining them, changing them, moving them around to get them right for where I am right now. And the thing is, these can change. These are not set in stone. They should be quite stable so they don't change every month, hopefully. But we all know life is unpredictable, so these can change. So now I'm quickly gonna show you how I do this, what my process is. So I basically defined iterations for myself. So I defined my long-term goals. And out of these, I broke them down into 3 yearly goals. And these are quite tricky to get right. So I'm currently on the track of missing one of my yearly goals. And I think that's totally fine, right? We know planning ahead for a whole year is really, really hard to get right, but it should give you kind of like something we talk about, North Stars. They should give you something to aim for. So after I define my yearly goals, I break them down at the beginning of the month into kind of like monthly goals. So what can I achieve within this month that brings me closer to my yearly goals, closer to my long-term achievement or like ambitions? And yeah, you guessed it. Then I break them down into weekly goals. And what I do at the end of the week is I have a retro. On Sunday evening, I sit down for 15, 20 minutes, depending how long it needs, and I basically think about, okay, how was this week? How have I been doing? Have I been tired a lot? Was it actually going well? Was I really focused? All of this, and basically write them down. And then at the end of the month, I do a bit of a longer retrospective. So I think about, okay, good, how did this month go? And kind of like inform how I'm gonna make the decision for my next monthly goals. And then I intend to do basically a yearly retrospective of how did this year go. And yeah, what's really important about this is, of course, you need to be honest with yourself. So I basically use a few different tools that I kind of like evolved over time of how I keep track of these things. So I use Trello because it's a very easy list-based kind of card, throw them at it into columns thing. And what I do in there is I keep track of goals and I keep track of individual tasks that I kind of want to achieve. And what I found after a while, if you just keep track of tasks, is when we're trying to learn something new, we're really, really rubbish at estimating how long it will take us to do something. And we all should know that, or most of us will probably know this because we're even very rubbish at estimating something that we normally know how to do, how long it will take us to build a feature. So what I found really, really beneficial in addition to that is defining for myself how much time do I want to spend on something. So if I, for example, want to learn coroutines, then at the beginning where I was like, okay, coroutines is something new, I want to learn what do they do, what do they mean. It's very hard to say like, yeah, I can build this feature using coroutines in a week, right? You might get it right, you might not get it right. But what's actually very interesting is kind of like, how much time do you want to spend on this? Like, can I spend 2 hours a week trying to learn coroutines? And then kind of combining these two, and why this is important comes in a second. And then I basically just throw them all in GitLab in Markdown, because it's just easy to use like basic Markdown formatting, and you can basically edit them online, check them in, see your history, and modify them online again. So what do I do when I have a retro? I basically check against my last week's goals, like the 3 or 4 things, or however many I wanted to kind of like set out to do, and see how have I done, how did I do. And then I also look at basically my spreadsheet where I keep my entries of how long I spend on something, and go like, okay, I have learned this thing, and it took me 3 hours. I tried to build this thing, I couldn't achieve it, but I spent, for example, 4 hours on it. So now you have a bit of a better idea, and I can like, okay, so this is actually bigger than I thought. Or sometimes you smash through 3 small tasks from Monday to Wednesday, and you're like, oh, that was actually easier than I thought. So now I can again make a decision, okay, why was this easier than I thought? Why was I able to plow through this so quickly? And basically what I do is I keep this in classic retrospective format, good, bad, change. So I just write down, okay, what was good about this week? What was bad about this week? What are things I would like to change about how I learn, how I work? And yeah, then I basically create the next tasks for the next week, rinse and repeat. And of course, now comes the important last part, which is if I identify an issue in, or I think I've identified an issue in how I work or how I learn, I adjust my process. That's the whole point where we want the feedback that influences our mental models. If I'm trying to learn closure, and I've been reading a book, and I've been trying to read through this book, and it took me 3 weeks so far, and I feel like I'm not making any progress, maybe it's time to move on to try to find maybe video lectures. And then suddenly you're like, oh yeah, video lectures work really well for me. And so when you try, for example, learn something new in Android, you already know like, oh yeah, video lectures is actually way better for me, so you might not try to even start with a book. And this is where I think it's really important to reflect on this and be really, really honest with yourself and go like, okay, where am I good? Where are my weaknesses? How can I improve my weaknesses? How can I improve my strengths? And of course, why this is in parentheses, don't adjust how you do things willy-nilly every week. Because if you change basically all of your variables every week, you don't really know why something worked better or why something didn't work well for you. So some of you might think basically when we talk about productivity and like keeping track of tasks and time and all of this stuff, what any of this has to do with being lazy. And what I found for myself is before I started doing this and before I started kind of breaking my ambitions down a bit more and keeping track of how I do things and actually be very honest with myself, I would have the desire, for example, on the weekend to do some programming. And I would do a bit of programming and I would sit down and I was basically, okay, you hit a little bit of a roadblock and then you go like, suddenly you're on Reddit and you get distracted and you're like, no, actually I want to do something. So you get back to programming and suddenly you're on Twitter and you go back and forth. And at the end of the weekends, I always had this feeling of like, I didn't really relax and I didn't really work. And I have the same like during the weeks, like when I split these things out and when I keep track of them and when I have them in a list where I can look at, yeah, actually, no, I did this, I did that, I achieved this and I spent 2 hours learning the guitar, I suddenly have this like, yeah, I did something. And suddenly you can think about it and you can go like, yeah, what have I actually learned? And it's just like, okay, C minor chord is now going easier than it was like 2 weeks ago or a week ago. So kind of like keeping track of this keeps a record of positive things that you have achieved that keep you motivated. So what is really important, I think, as a message when we hear about these talks from Christina, for example, about productivity and deep work and time spent on things and keeping track of tasks and time you do on things, is always like, you are good enough. It is really, really noble trying to improve yourself, but don't destroy yourself. Like, as Christina said, sleep, eat, do sports, see friends, look after your family. These are really, really important things. And yeah, You can often improve, but always be happy with how you are right now. So, this is the bit. Well, I need your help. Because after basically doing this now for nearly a whole year, I realized that this is a mess. Like using 3 different tools is really annoying. Especially like keeping entries into a spreadsheet is not ideal. So a while back, a few weeks back, I thought I want to build something to make this better. I want to build something that enables me to keep track of these things, keep track of retrospectives, my goals, how I do things. So what I would love is if a few people could try this out. This thing is currently in a closed alpha, so it's brand new. I basically put it on the Play Store yesterday evening. Just try it out, see how it goes. There is, if you sign up, this uses the Firebase app distribution, so you can download it, you would get updates. And there comes a feedback link. Please tell me in any way this could be better, or this could help you more, or maybe something in a way that you used it, that I didn't think about using it. But yeah, that would be awesome. So yeah, that's my lightning talk on personal retrospectives. Thank you. So, because we don't have a second slot, are there any questions?
So with the long-term goals, how general and how specific should you be in setting those?
With your long-term goals, how general and how specific should you be? So I think something like, I want to be an amazing Android developer is quite a general thing, right? Because that can mean very different things. It could mean you focus, for example, on the UI frameworks or how the UI stuff works, or you focus more on the build tools or whatever, but you can still be amazing developer. So I think setting them relatively broad, but basically narrowing them down with the key activities, kind of like, what do I think I want to be doing for me to see this as being alive and being like achieved? I think this is where it all comes together. But as I said, like it took me basically 3-4 iterations, writing them down, rewriting them, crossing things out, writing things anew. So I think this is all a process that you need to basically go through.
Anyone has any other question?
First of all, thanks for a nice talk. And my question is, how do you manage goals between different roles you have? Like one of your role is definitely Android developer, probably other is like husband or boyfriend, another role is like healthy person. Do you track it all in one place, or you like have different spaces and so on?
So I keep everything in one place because I like to have a separation between work and private life. I still think I'm one person and I see my job as being a part of me. And I think separating these two things out and basically then needing to look at two things and see how they kind of like overlap and how much time you spend. I tried to do that for a while. I tried to keep separate lists of the things I want to learn and separate lists for kind of like my professional things. It didn't work out for me. Maybe it works out for someone else. Maybe someone wants to have a very strict separation there. But yeah, it didn't work for me because I still have the feeling I'm one person, I have one life. So
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Good. Awesome. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of droidCon.